classification of the market structures. Economists classify the market structures into four broader categories. One, they talk about perfectly competitive markets, perfect competition. Then we are talking about monopolistic competitive markets. Then we have oligopoly, and finally it is monopoly. Of course, there could be a few more additional classifications, but this forms the significant differentiating classifications for different kinds of industries and different kinds of products. And just to understand the key characteristics of each one of them, in a perfect competition, we find too many sellers who are very small, which means the market share of the individual sellers are much lesser. And because the market share is much lesser, none of them have a typical pricing power. They are all the price takers only. They accept the price which the market goes with, but they cannot typically play a key role in terms of setting the prices. The reason being, what they typically sell are all homogeneous products. Right? No product differentiation exists in a perfect competition. So whatever the products they are selling, there are perfect substitutes available for those products, which mean if they try to increase the price of their product a little bit, they are going to lose out to their competitors. And these are such kind of products where entry barriers are very low, exit barriers are very low, which is also indicating that anyone can enter into that particular business at any point in time, and anyone can leave at any point in time. And these kind of markets do not require any kind of advertising or branding, because they do not offer any kind of specialized or differentiated kind of a products. So the advertising and branding is only going to increase their cost, but it is not going to do anything for them. So no advertising and branding. And from the producer's perspective, they have a perfectly elastic demand curve. What does this mean? The demand curve is pretty much horizontal. This is also saying that if they try to decrease the price a little bit, they are going to get a very heavy demand. But at the same time, if they are going to increase the price a little bit, they are going to lose out on the overall customers very heavily. That is where we are saying they have a perfectly elastic demand curve. And this is where their consumer and producer surplus is getting maximized. They will sell at equilibrium quantity itself. Right, these are the ones they have to sell equilibrium quantity at the equilibrium price, and that is the reason there is no deadweight loss at all in case of perfectly competitive market, which is also saying that the summation of the consumer surplus and producer surplus is very perfectly maximized under the perfect competition situation, right? Now, moving on to the next important structure, the monopolistic competition. Here, one important differentiator is the products are not homogeneous. They are differentiated products. So, they are not homogeneous, which means there is a differentiation in the product either on lines of quality. They differentiate it based on the quality, they differentiate it based on the features built into the product. So which means they try to project their product is different from that of their competitors, right? And that is the reason they have marketing and advertising, because they have to communicate that their product is different. So the marketing and advertising costs are slightly higher in terms of monopolistic competition. But at the same time, we see there are many producers. It's not a market that is dominated just by 5 or 10 players. Any number of players can enter into the market. Some of them are branded players, some of them are unbranded kind of a players, especially as for something like cloth, something like detergent powders, something like soaps. You will find so many players, some branded, some unbranded, and the way the firms try to promote their differentiated products is majorly through marketing and advertising, right? And they are, even in that market, they are low entry and exit barriers, though they are not that low as that of perfect competition. You will find that the entry and the exit barriers are much lower in monopolistic competition. But one thing we have to understand, though the marketing and advertising expenditures are very high, the benefits that are being realized by different firms is completely different. It may very well result in the inefficient use of resources also. So there has to be a pretty much a perfect game plan to be put up in order to reach the customers and try to get their products sold to a great extent. And they do have pricing power to some extent. We see some of the branded products are priced slightly much higher compared to the unbranded products. So they have, as long as they are able to communicate the features of the product, the differentiation of the product quite heavily, effectively to the customers, they have the pricing power as well. But they are not price takers, at least, because they face a downward sloping demand curve. The firm is having a downward sloping demand curve. So they can, and individual firms also can play at any layer, because they can talk about they being product differentiators. They can choose a price somewhere here, somewhere here, and target that particular quantity which they can really go with. So they are, that is the reason we call that in these markets they are price searchers, so they are not price takers. Right? They are not having one single price. In case of perfect competition, the price is perfectly horizontal. So the demand curve is perfectly horizontal, the price is perfectly horizontal. They have to take that price, otherwise they are out, because it's a perfectly elastic demand curve. Whereas with respect to the monopolistic competition, it's a downward sloping demand curve for the firm, so they can very well choose the price at which they would like to operate. Right? That's the reason I'm saying the demand curve is less elastic. It's not perfectly horizontal. It's not a perfectly elastic kind of a demand curve. It is less elastic, especially when new and innovative products are coming up. In that case, probably the pricing power is much higher. But of course, if that product is a real good hit, lot of competitors will enter into the market, and that pricing power is constantly going to go up, which means in a monopolistic competition, one of the important things that a firm needs to really look at is constantly keep innovating the products, constantly try promoting. That's where you see, with respect to either a toothpaste or a soap, you will find or a shampoo or a detergent, we will find that every few months a new product comes out from a company with a different feature altogether, because the more and more they are innovative in the product features, the more they are able to survive in that market. That is how a monopolistic competition is operating. Then, the most important thing which we see with respect to oligopoly is you hardly have a few sellers. The producers are very few, 5 to 10 producers overall. Look at the airline market. right? No local players operating. Very few, or probably look at the telecom sector. You have 5 to 10 players, and not too many local players operating. So mostly all are branded companies. You hardly see any kind of local market being operated in that, because the entry and the exit barriers are very high. It's pretty much costly to enter into that business or even exit out of the business. And in some cases, the products could be homogeneous or they could be differentiating. If there is a differentiating, obviously advertising and branding costs are much higher. Even if they are homogeneous product, the advertising costs are much higher itself, because it has to be a kind of it has to be a kind of buzz creation at any point in time. So even the oligopolies also involve branding and advertising costs, but what we see is in monopolistic competition that cost is much higher. And of course they have a very good pricing power, right? Because even in their case you see that the firm's demand curve is downward sloping. But what we typically see is, when I compare it with the monopolistic competition, the demand curve may be either more elastic in some cases or less elastic in some cases compared to the monopolistic competition. And economies of scale are much higher, because they are able to capture a significant market share, because very few players and all of them are more or less equally sized or equal